Good morning, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to another edition of Breaking News. Today is Monday. It's the 14th day of July, 2025, and things are really heating up today, both in Israel as well as in the United States Senate. In fact, key decisions are about to be made that are going to have a major impact on how things will go forward with Israel and Hamas, as well as Russia and Ukraine. The operative word today is showdown. Well, let's look at the headlines. First of all, in a surprise move, Benjamin Netanyahu is determined to secure a Gaza ceasefire, and he's open to compromise on the IDF withdrawal from Gaza. This is from YNET. Abbas urges Hamas to free the hostages, has let Ramallah, the Palestinian Authority, take over governing the Gaza Strip. This is from the Times of Israel, and that fits very well with the so much of the world that wants a Palestinian rulership of Gaza after Hamas is thrown out. All right, and then you have this story. Will the government collapse tonight? A secret letter from Rabbi Landau revealed. This is from JFeed or N12 from Israel. There's the possibility that the ultra-Orthodox groups will bolt the government because no progress is being made on this draft law we've talked about in the past. And so there's a showdown going on right there. And speaking of showdown, our fourth headline, senators offer Trump a sledgehammer to end the Ukraine war. This is an article from Newsmax. And again, push is coming to shove. So let's look at these stories. Headline number one, Netanyahu determined to secure Gaza ceasefire, open to compromise on the IDF withdrawal. This is a YNET story. IDF officials say building the proposed humanitarian city in Rafah could take over a year and cost up to $15 billion, far longer and costlier than first estimated. National Security Minister Ben-Gvir calls the project a political smokescreen ahead of a Hamas deal. All right. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is reportedly determined to reach a ceasefire and a hostage deal with Hamas and is showing new flexibility regarding the withdrawal from the Morag corridor between Rafah and Han Yunis. Sources familiar with a security cabinet meeting said on Sunday. The officials who spoke, they always do on conditions anonymity, said negotiations are ongoing in Doha and the updated maps are being reviewed. While a deal may not materialize within days, they said the talks are progressing and could take a few more days. If a deal is reached, there will be no humanitarian city in Rafah under the current circumstances because no humanitarian zone would be maintained, one source said. Netanyahu was willing to compromise on issues he had previously held firm on. During the cabinet discussion, the IDF representatives estimated that establishing the planned humanitarian city in Rafah, a vast tent camp intended to house up to 500,000 displaced Gazans, would take over a year and cost between 10 and $15 billion. This already sharply contrasts with earlier projections, suggesting the camp could be built within 6 months. A more realistic plan was demanded that would be shorter and less expensive and more practical from Netanyahu. He ordered officials to submit an improved proposal. Now, some participants said the IDF appeared reluctant to fully back the humanitarian city project, which has drawn, as we've said, international criticism. They calling it a concentration camp and maybe presenting an unrealistic timeline to stall the plan. The discussion also touched on funding sources for the project, with cost estimates ranging from several billion to tens of billions of shekels. Israel does not intend to allow residents of the camp to return to northern Gaza. In other words, they're going to split the people from north to south, have a humanitarian south in southern Gaza as they rid northern Gaza of Hamas, because that's basically where they're all settled right now. National Security Minister Ben-Gvir criticized the humanitarian city initiative, calling it a smokescreen to conceal an impending hostage deal with Hamas. It'll certainly not be built, he said, as part of a surrender deal being negotiated with Hamas, under which the IDF will withdraw from terror areas seized in combat. Hundreds of deadly terrorists will be released, and Hamas will again gain breathing room to rebuild. Spin is no substitute for total victory. In other words, as you recall, as of now, it's about 80% of Gaza, more or less, that Israel is in control of. The map that Hamas rejected with the ceasefire proposal had Israel only in charge of about 40% of Gaza, about half of what they have right now. And Hamas said, no, that's not enough. They got to withdraw from more. This humanitarian city, this idea everybody's talking about being a huge concentration camp in southern Gaza. And so it's not doing real well politically as far as the world's concerned. And so Netanyahu has problems with his own coalition. Ben-Gvir and Smotrich have, threatened to bolt the government if this type of deal comes through. Because remember, it's going to be a 60-day ceasefire. Hamas will get back um, hundreds of prisoners that are there. They can again fight. They'll get back territory that they've lost to Israel recently in the last few months, which they'll be able to resupply, rearm, and be able to fight another day. 60 days is a long time. They're still digging tunnels underneath the ground, believe it or not. And so it's the fighting aspect of this would be very much threatened from Israel's perspective and have to do so much all over again if this hostage deal is completed. Also, there's only 10 hostages that'll be released. The other 10 will never be released, the final 10. And so how do you choose between the two? So you've got all these issues going on. And Israel, it's like we talked about the other day, Sophie's choice. If they're in a lose-lose situation, whatever they do, it's going to be a bad ending to it. And so what are the lesser of evils they'll choose? And again, we just don't know. But we also know at the same time, President Trump is saying he expects a deal very soon. He's actually said that. And so what's going to happen? Will Hamas accept any plan, or will they keep saying we want more, more, more? Well, we should know soon because we have a showdown here. So we'll see what happens. We'll let you know as soon as we know. Now, on the same line, Mahmoud Abbas, the leader of the Palestinian Authority, urges Hamas to free the hostages, said the terror group won't rule post-war Gaza. Basically, he says the Palestinian Authority should be in charge now of governing the Gaza Strip in the future. He urged Hamas to release the hostages as holding hand over the weapons to the Palestinian Authority, stressing that the terror group will not rule the Gaza Strip after the war ends. That the terror group he's referring to is Hamas, of course. You could argue that the Palestinian Authority is a terror group also. They certainly have been. So one terror group seemingly wants to replace the other. This is a meeting in Amman, Jordan on Sunday with former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. Abbas called for the release of Palestinian prisoners from Israeli jails, immediate ceasefire in Gaza, unhindered entry of humanitarian aid to the Strip, according to the PA's official news agency, Rafah. He also called for the PA to be given control of the enclave, a notion long rejected by Israel. He further stressed the need to implement the two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict on the Arab Peace Initiative and called for an international peace conference to be held in New York, the report said. This is that one they've been talking about that Blair's put together with Macron and others to try and come up with some idea of a Palestinian state that will supposedly solve all the issues, all the problems in the Middle East, which we know is madness even to think that. The PA, as we know, had the initial control in Gaza until the citizens voted them out. Like the next year, they voted in Hamas. And the idea of the PA being put in charge is popular with many Western countries who don't want to see any type of Israeli rule in the future. So what do we have? We have another showdown coming in this area. Speaking of showdown, headline number 3, will the government collapse tonight? A letter from Rabbi Landau revealed. This is from N12 News, or it's called JFeed, the website. In a handwritten letter penned after the fast of 17 of Tammuz, Rabbi Dov Landau instructed United Torah Judaism to leave the coalition, leave the government, unless Minister of Knesset Edelstein delivers on his promise to advance the draft law, and Shas, which is another ultra-Orthodox party, may soon follow. The escalating crisis over Israel's military draft law took a dramatic turn as Rabbi Dov Landau, the leading Lithuanian Haredi authority, signed a handwritten letter Sunday night ordering his party, United Torah Judaism, UTJ, to immediately withdraw from the government if no draft bill is submitted today, as promised. In a rare show of urgency, the rabbis allowed a brief extension until Monday night. That'd be tonight in Israel. Remember, they're 10 hours ahead of us right now. We're making this about 5 something in the morning. So it's 3 in the afternoon already there in Israel. He said it's going to be a final opportunity for Netanyahu and Edelstein to deliver, but the message is clear. The time for delays is over. As reported earlier, UTJ has issued Netanyahu a 24-hour ultimatum to bring forward an agreed-upon version of the draft exemption law. If not, the ultra-Orthodox faction will leave the government coalition immediately. And again, Shas has also confirmed their party is seriously considering quitting the government, with the final decision expected from the Council of Torah Sages in the coming days. Behind the scenes, there is mounting fury in these circles of the ultra-Orthodox. Leaders accuse Edelstein of deliberately stalling the legislative process to prevent the bill from passing before the summer recess. The summer recess in just a couple of weeks, then it'll be moot. And so they were promised to get something done before the summer recess. Nothing has happened. So unless these things get sorted out, there's going to be a real mess here. The summer recess is almost upon Israel's government. It seems we've got another showdown here. Again, we should know the results sometime later today as to whether this group will bolt the coalition and bring down the government. They usually threaten, but they usually work something out. And the reason being, if they bolted the government, any new government would not have this group in. The only reason the ultra-Orthodox group is in Netanyahu's coalition is he has to compromise and work with them to get many of like the draft law to keep these ultra-Orthodox young students away from the military, away from the fighting anyway. And other coalitions would not have, they could be formed to form a government without having these two groups in, and then they would be at the mercy of the laws that this coalition would put together. So it's a real mess. But again, another showdown, and they could leave as early as tonight. We'll see. Usually something works out, but you never know these days. Now, speaking of showdown, this last one could be the top story. I was debating which one to do first because this is another huge story. Headline number 4. Senators offer Trump a sledgehammer to end the Ukraine war. Senators Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal announced Sunday a bipartisan sanctions package that would grant President Donald Trump sweeping powers, described as a diplomatic sledgehammer to force Russia to end its war against Ukraine. Speaking on Face the Nation, Graham, this is a CBS program, emphasized the urgency, noting Trump's months-long efforts to persuade Russian President Putin to negotiate peace have been rebuffed. A turning point regarding Russia's invasion of Ukraine is coming, Gramnesty said. Dick and I, speaking of Blumenthal, we've got 85 co-sponsors in the Senate for congressional sanctions, a sledgehammer available to President Trump to go after Putin's economy. The senators detailed a sanctions passage granting Trump authority, now get this, to impose tariffs of up to 500%, 500% on countries aiding Russia, specifically naming China, India, and Brazil. This is the so-called BRICS countries as key enablers of Putin's war machine. This is truly a sledgehammer available to President Trump to end this war, Graham reiterated. Blumenthal stressed bipartisan and transatlantic unity behind the sanctions. European allies are absolutely in solidarity, he said, citing recent discussions within NATO leaders who demanded rigorous sanctions. The senator also addressed concerns among some Democrats, assuring them the legislation includes a presidential waiver similar to past measures, balancing flexibility and congressional oversight. The legislation also proposes tapping Russian assets frozen abroad, roughly $300 billion in Europe and $5 billion in the U.S., to support Ukraine's defense efforts. Blumenthal highlighted Europe's willingness to use portions of these assets to sustain Ukrainian forces, asserting it's time to do it. So basically, these additional moves are going to bolster Ukraine militarily. Graham hinted at forthcoming announcements suggesting Trump could plans a significant increase in weapons delivered to Ukraine and arms sales to European allies. The idea of America selling weapons to help Ukraine is very much in play, he said. Putin has calculated we would tire, but he made a huge mistake. Now, here's part of the issue. Amid rising battlefield challenges, including North Korea's troop deployments to Ukraine, Blumenthal argued that strength and unity among allies remains vital. Putin is a thug. He understands only force. Blumenthal said emphasizing that confronting Russia and its partners like North Korea and Iran is imperative to U.S. national security. All right, so basically it says we really need to express the strength of the United States because only strength can get Putin to the table. All right, so here we go. We look like another showdown is imminent. Trump's going to make this major announcement today. What will he say about Russia? So all in all, here's what we have. A number of major developments happening right now. Israel and Gaza, Netanyahu and the ultra-Orthodox parties, and the U.S. and Russia. And then you've got Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority waiting in the wings to form a Palestinian state in Gaza in place of Hamas. So we should have some answers for you in the next edition of Breaking News as these stories are developing today. So as always, stay tuned. There's never a dull moment here. And as we say, all these things we're talking about, we've mentioned this time after time, fit what the Bible says the world will be like at the time of the end as we consider these stories within the last days Bible prophecy, how Russia has to end the war with Ukraine so eventually they can form a coalition down the line sometime to attack Israel. Hamas or whoever's there in the Gaza Strip has to be neutralized because Israel has to have peace on its southern and northern borders because that's the assumption someday when they get invaded. They're not expecting any type of attack from anyone. And that means Hamas has to be neutralized, as does Hezbollah in the northern part of Lebanon. And these things are working all out. So anyway, we'll see how it turns out in the short term. We don't know, but we'll be here to tell you. And again, our materials and from our website, Educating Our World, are all free. 12 books on Bible prophecy, including 25 signs we're near the end. Please take advantage of free downloads from our website, Educating Our World, under the heading of Bible prophecy. All right, I'm Don Stewart. We'll be obviously having more later. Until then, as always, may the Lord richly, richly bless.